Hello, and thank you for joining us on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And on this week's episode, we will be exploring some early Christmas traditions, crafts, and music. The holidays are traditionally a time to gather with our friends, our families, our loved ones, and share in the spirit of the season. Of course, 2020 has had other plans for us, and what we're dealing with right now has altered many of our normal seasonal activities at this time of year. But nonetheless, even with the ongoing challenges we face, there are many things we can still be thankful for. And first and foremost, we wish everyone the very best of the season, and take care and be well, and enjoy this episode of Ask a Historian as we wander down memory lane and explore many early Christmas traditions. And joining us this week on Ask a Historian is Lindsay Doren. She is the Education and Engagement Coordinator with the Museums of Mississauga. And Lindsay has her hand in so many different programs and projects around the city in terms of the museums and the culture division and all things heritage. And Lindsay, thank you for taking the time to join us here and talk about a few Christmas programs and Christmas traditions connected to the museums. And of course, this year, not quite the normal year, but thank you for joining us this week.
Thank you. I'm so happy. Like you said, this year is not the normal year, so we haven't been able to do the normal Christmas and holiday festivities we normally do. So it's nice to be able to at least talk a little bit about them and some of our favorite Christmas traditions here at the museums.
What kind of programs do the museums traditionally offer for Christmas?
Well, normally we offer a school program for elementary and high school students this time of year, which is quite busy at both our BENARES historic house, so students can learn a little bit about how Christmas used to be celebrated in the 1830s and in the Victorian time period. And we also like to do an event at the houses where we invite people to come in and see what the houses would have been decorated like. We cook food over the fire at both sites and kind of share those early holiday traditions. And this year, what our hope had been when we were still allowed to have visitors through was to do some special topics on our weekend tours. So visitors could have signed up or could sign up for the topics that are interested to them and come and do a tour and learn more about, for example, things like the history of gingerbread or crazy Christmas traditions from years past. Or we're going to do something related to fire and light in Edwardian Christmas.
Well, I mean, we always lament of the course that the year has taken for us in terms of programming and public engagement, but challenges beget opportunities, and the museums are doing some new things this year in terms of getting their material online, and I know you have lots of plans for 2021. But what are some of the things that people can do in these days of COVID in terms of connecting to the museums for Christmas themes?
Yeah, so this year you can't visit us in person, but you can get some of our favorite recipes and treats online. We filmed 2 videos. One is cooking a Christmas pudding in the BENARES kitchen, and the other is cooking gingerbread in the Bradley kitchen. So you can watch and learn about some of those early Christmas foods and take the recipe from the website as well to make it yourself. Our new youth council has also created a video sharing some of their more modern and current Christmas traditions. And they've also actually created a coloring sheet that you can download and color and then share with us on social media. And if you happen to be out and about walking around either of our sites, because they are beautiful sites to take a walk around and enjoy the nature, or we have lots of people who like to walk their dogs around the sites too. If you stop by either of the barns on our properties, we've actually blown up some Christmas cards from the Edwardian era, so around 1900, and put them up on the barn that people can stop and take photos with.
Well, that's a wonderful idea and a neat way to engage in the in the public outdoor space. I look forward to seeing that, actually. That sounds kind of a neat way to connect with people. So in turn, one of the things, and I've done some programming with my own family over the years down at the museums, and some of the things, particularly like crafts, but you teach a lot about Christmas traditions, some of the things that we perhaps do in a regular Christmas decorations or festivities, if you will, but don't really know the roots of. And I'm wondering if you can maybe share one or two of them with us in terms of kind of the educational component behind some of these Christmas traditions that we enjoy today.
Definitely. Kind of the number one reason why people visit us at Christmas normally is because they want to know, like, what is a Canadian Christmas? What's a traditional Canadian Christmas? And we love to share that information. Now, the Christmas that we kind of consider classic nowadays has its roots back in the Victorian era. So in BENARES Historic House, where I'm actually sitting right here in the sitting room, you can kind of see some of the decorations behind me. They really made Christmas what it is. So a lot of the traditions that we celebrate come from that time period. One of the ones which is my favorite is Christmas crackers. Nowadays, a lot of us, especially in Canada and in Britain, when we sit down for Christmas dinner, there's a little cracker at our plates. We open it up, we put on the silly hats, we get our little charms inside. There's usually a pretty silly joke or maybe a trivia question in it too. And this was something that was actually developed in the 1830s. And it was developed by a man who basically wanted a way to sell his little trinkets and little pieces of candy. So he decided to put it in little cardboard tubes, wrap those tubes in crepe paper, and initially they were put on Christmas trees and used as part of your Christmas tree decoration. So instead of having them at the dinner table, on Christmas morning or Christmas Eve, you would go and pull a cracker from the tree and open it up to get the treats inside. And then shortly after developing it, he realized that he needed a little bit more of a hook. So he added in that little explosive element by adding in the popper. And that's what that little cardboard thing is, that when you pull it, it makes that popping sound. And so that was kind of a little added benefit, because who doesn't like creating a little bit of a mini explosion in their hands, right? So Christmas crackers are one of the ones. And then the other kind of tradition that I think most people think of when they think of a classic Christmas but don't necessarily know the history of is the Christmas pudding or the plum pudding or even the fig pudding. It kind of is known by many different names, and it's essentially the same thing. It's not a pudding like Jello pudding like we tend to think of, but it's a type of cake that is steamed. So you cook it in boiling water, and it has lots of dried fruits and candied peel in it. Kind of tastes like a fruit cake. It definitely always has raisins in it. So if you don't like fruit cake, probably not going to enjoy Christmas pudding. But if you enjoy fruit cake, if you like raisins in your food, definitely Christmas pudding is very delicious and you will like it. But it's kind of that brown looking ball with icing on top. You might see it with a little piece of holly on top, or even the thing that's set aflame and carried to the table for Christmas celebrations. And that's actually a tradition that goes way back. And it was prepared by families 3 weeks before Christmas because like fruitcake, the longer it sits, the better it tastes. And it would be a special treat because that candied peel you would use in it, the candied orange and the lemon, would be quite expensive. Depending on where you lived in the world, citrus fruit was grown far away. So when you wanted to get it, it could be hard to find and it cost a lot of money. So you would add these kind of expensive ingredients into your Christmas pudding. And then on Christmas Day, you maybe lit it aflame, maybe just ate it plain. But the Victorians had a special tradition in puddings at Christmas, and that was to bake charms in them. So you would bake usually a thimble, a button, a coin, a key, and a ring. And then when you sat down to eat it, when people got slices, if they got a charm, the idea was that charm would foretell their future for the new year. So if you got a ring, oh, that's lucky. That meant you would have a marriage in your future, which was, of course, most Victorian ladies, young ladies' dreams, is to know that they were going to find a spouse. What the Victorian men thought about it, don't really know. maybe less excited to get a ring. If you got a button, that was usually not great. That meant that you were going to be poor. If you got a coin, it meant riches were in your future. If you got a key, it usually meant that travel was in your future. And if you got a thimble, that meant you were going to be a spinster, so an unmarried lady. So that was not a particularly nice one to get, unless you wanted to be an unmarried lady, which I'm an unmarried lady and I'm perfectly happy with being a spinster. So I don't know, I would have had no problems getting the thimble. So that's kind of one of my favorite ones, is Christmas pudding. Not only because when you think about it, Christmas, that traditional British Christmas, you think of that Christmas pudding made popular partially because of Charles Dickens and all the images of that show up in the movies and the illustrations for his novels. But also because I like the idea of charms. Nowadays, we don't so much bake charms and cakes. It is a choking hazard. I should very much say, if you are going to bake charms in your cake nowadays, what you usually do is you either wrap it in very large pieces of tin foil, so it is very obviously in a piece, so you don't accidentally swallow it, and also to keep, you know, whatever charms you're using from getting like covered in cake. Or you can, what we like to do at the museums is we play a little charm cake game where we actually put charms in boxes and people choose a box and open it up, and that represents the charm that they would normally have gotten in Christmas pudding.
I remember growing up, my aunt lived a couple streets over from us, and she used to do the Christmas pudding every year. And I don't know if it was traditional or not, but it was made before Christmas. And the most I can remember of thinking about it was it fermented for a few weeks, and it was pretty potent by the time we went to eating it.
Guess I should say the other thing about Christmas pudding is that it always has brandy in it.
Yes.
Raisins, candied fruit, and brandy. Everyone kind of had their own family's Christmas pudding recipe. Plum pudding or figgy pudding, because if you use dried figs, it would be like fig pudding. Plum pudding does not actually mean the fruit or even dried plums. Way back from the like medieval era of time, they called any sort of candied fruit or candied peel plums or sugar plums, and that's in fact where you get from the night before Christmas, the children with visions of sugar plums dancing in their head. It's just any kind of sugared fruit. So that's sometimes why it's called a plum pudding, because it has candied fruit. But the brandy is pretty key. And actually one of my favorite memories at the museum is in the past we've done a cooking program where we had visitors come in and cook a whole Edwardian Christmas dinner with us. And because the pudding needs to be prepared in advance, I would often have one started and cooking, and then I would give them certain parts of the recipe to do. And this particular recipe called for the raisins to be soaked in a cup of brandy, and then once the raisins to be added in, and to add in a part of that brandy into the recipe. Well, I kind of left out a chunk of the recipe instructions. So instead of just adding the remaining brandy into the pudding mix, our visitors added the whole remaining bottle of brandy into the pudding. And then they called me and were like, "We don't think this is right. This is really liquid." And I was like, "Oh no, we need this." But you know what? We just added some more breadcrumbs to the mix. We cooked it up like a regular pudding, and our visitors enjoyed it at our event. So the pudding is forgiving, but most definitely boozy. And if you set it afire, you're basically pouring more brandy on top of it and lighting it aflame. Although speaking of flaming booze, I'm going to share one more favorite thing, which we don't really do nowadays, but it's one of my favorite Victorian Christmas games. The Victorians and the Edwardians, they really loved playing parlor games at Christmas time, really for any gathering, but Christmas especially. They would play a game called Snapdragon, where you would take a bowl and you would fill it with your liquor of choice, normally brandy. You would put raisins in it, again, those raisins. You would light the bowl on fire, and then the game was to either stick your hand into the fire, flaming bowl of liquor, to grab raisins, or in some cases, you had your hands behind your back and you just dipped your head into the flaming bowl of brandy to grab raisins, kind of like bobbing for apples, but with flaming booze. Snapdragon.
I'm going to assume you don't do that one.
We do not. fact, I've never actually met anyone who has done Snapdragon, but there are some lovely illustrations of the game from period newspapers and magazines and explanations of telling you how to do it. But sadly, Snapdragon, one of those traditions, no longer followed too much.
You know, so I'm amazed. Some of the Christmas traditions I find absolutely, you know, wonderful origins, and that we still celebrate them. And then other ones like Snapdragon, I'm just kind of shaking my head at a little bit.
I kind of understand why those ones are not so popular anymore. Some of the others, like, yes, delicious gingerbread, sweet treats, singing Christmas carols, lots of fun.
I was gonna say, never mind things that aren't popular anymore. It makes you wonder why they got popular in the first place.
I always find really interesting is that in Victorian celebrations for Christmas, they use lots of paper decorations, lots of flame liquor. They actually even lit their Christmas trees with candles, small individual candles on clips you would clip onto the tree. And yet they lived like open flame, paper, all sorts of like gas and lighting equipment, Christmas trees that could be dry, although they tended to cut their Christmas trees and put them up on Christmas Eve, probably for the reasons that putting candle flames on a dry Christmas tree, everybody knew would be a bad idea. But I often wonder how there were not more fire hazards, or even with the parlor games, some of the games involve people being blindfolded and wandering blindfolded around rooms that are filled with like candles or gas or oil lamps. I guess they like to live dangerously.
They courted the fire in wooden houses, nonetheless. No, it does. I always wondered with the wax dipped candles on Christmas trees, because we've certainly seen those traditions, and I always wondered if it was a really short lived thing, like they get lit for a moment and then put out. Maybe we see the illustrations, we hear the stories, but no one actually says, were they lit for an hour or were they lit for 5 minutes?
I suspect that they were lit short term. You read in some people's traditions or stories that Christmas Eve was the time when kind of families got together, and then everyone would come together, and the first thing they would do is decorate the Christmas tree and light the candle. Everyone would stand back and kind of ooh and ah. And oftentimes the Christmas trees had little gifts on them, things like the Christmas crackers or little paper cones filled with candy and popcorn. And I imagine that after that stage where the oohing and ahhing had happened and the gifts had been removed, someone probably judiciously went through and blew out all the candles, especially as the family would move over to dinner. You probably wouldn't want to leave it burning alone in a room.
True. I always wonder how long the tree stood up. Traditionally we have, December 6th to January 6th or something is usually the decking the halls and decorations. But I always wondered about the tree itself historically. How long did it live in the house, so to speak?
My understanding is that it was a pretty short-term thing. Like it came up for Christmas Eve and probably went on Christmas or Boxing Day. Boxing Day, it wasn't. Now there were some types of greenery like the Yule log, which is a tradition which goes back thousands of years. Yep. You would come in your hearth and you would actually burn long term, save a little piece of that Yule log, and burn it next year for good luck, which is kind of a tradition we don't normally do now too, because most of us don't have fireplaces, although you may have heard of Yule logs before. Maybe you've heard of a Yule log cake.
I kind of like those ones.
You've probably seen those rolled cakes, which the Yule logs used to be actual physical logs. You would find a nice big log on your property. It would burn for like the 12 days of Christmas. And it was a way to usher in light in the cold, dark winter, right? We don't think about it quite as often, but Christmas falls a few days after the longest night of the year, the darkest day. And so in a time before electricity, a lot of the things that people celebrate in wintertime were things that reminded us that spring would come again. There's greenery in our house to remind us or to encourage spring to come again. And those lighting elements, the candles on the tree, the Yule log, give us heat and warmth, a reason to gather with our families and be warm, which is really kind of what the key to the holiday was then and now. We can't gather with our families this year, but we can still celebrate with our families. that we're with and that we're separated from, and kind of be inspired by the spirit of the season, which was thankfulness for what we have and knowing that a new year is going to come, spring is going to come again, there's going to be light, there's going to be warmth, there's going to be the things we love doing, right?
But in that vein, and maybe that's a perfect segue, Lindsay, you teed it up there. You're going to share with us some Christmas crafts that traditionally the museums, you can do at the museums, but something that people will be able to do on their own as well. And, you know, that's about the gathering too, and the sharing and the stories. And, you know, those are timeless things. The gathering with family, the spirit of the season. I often talk with my children about the spirit of Christmas. And, you know, we maybe we cannot gather, but we can still connect. And you know, I compliment the museums on making those connections. I guess maintaining the role, that sounds very clinical, but I mean, it is a tradition in our community to go to the museums and enjoy these historic Christmas traditions, and we can still enjoy them. So my compliments to the museums and the museum team for keeping the Christmas connections going, and we look forward to sharing the crafts that you're gonna share with us, and again, keep connecting however we can. And these days will pass in time, and we can get back there in person. But in the meantime, doesn't mean we can't celebrate Christmas.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Lindsay, very much, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. For today, I've got two really easy holiday crafts to share with you. Both are traditional and use ingredients that you might already have in your home, or you can pick up from a local grocery store. The first is a craft that would have been done in the 1830s by the Bradley family, perhaps, as a Christmas decoration. In the 1830s, Christmas decorations were a lot more basic. Typically, you brought in fresh greenery and red berries and used it to decorate your house, and you used what you had available. And this craft, which is a popcorn and cranberry garland, used ingredients that early settlers would have found easy to get. They grew a lot of corn on their properties, and popcorn was actually a favorite snack of theirs, and cranberries also grew in Ontario. In fact, right near where the Bradley Museum is located, we have a place called Rattray Marsh, which was once known as Cranberry Marsh because of the cranberries that grew there. And this is a pretty easy craft to do. All you need is a needle, and I like to use a nice big needle for this. Some thread. You can use whatever sewing thread you have around. If you have heavy duty thread, that's great. If not, you're just going to double up on a regular sewing thread, and it doesn't really matter what color it is because you're not going to see it. And then all you need to do is thread a pattern of cranberries and popcorn on. Now, for popcorn, you can definitely use microwave popcorn. Just make sure you get the microwave popcorn that does not have any salt or butter flavor. Because if you use the one with butter or salt, it's gonna be a little greasy. It's also gonna have a yellow color and a not so Christmassy scent, unless you like the scent of butter, in which case maybe you would like that. I actually find it easier to use popcorn, which I popped myself at home. I find that the kernels get a little bit bigger and sturdier than microwave popcorn. It's actually really easy to make popcorn yourself at home. All you need is vegetable oil, popcorn kernels, and a heavy bottom pan. You just put about 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil and about 1/3 of a cup of popcorn kernels in your pot. Put the lid on with a little bit of an opening. Put your pot on medium, and then let it sit until you hear it popping. When the popping starts to stop, carefully pull the pot off the heat. You don't want to open the top because you might get hit by some popcorn kernels. Wait for the popping to stop, and then you have your popcorn. And you can see as I go, if I have a kernel that's too small or breaks apart as I put it on the string, I just put it back into my bowl, and I can eat that as a snack later. I can see it happens. This can kind of be a messy craft. And like I said, popcorn was actually a favorite snack of the early settlers, except for they would cook it over the open fire, but they would add butter and salt just like we would. Now, if you don't want to use your cranberry and popcorn garland inside on your tree, or maybe you have a mantelpiece or somewhere else you can use it to decorate with, this is also a great craft to make and use to decorate your bushes and trees outside, because the popcorn and cranberries are a lovely snack for your local wildlife like birds and squirrels. And as long as you use air pop popcorn, so no butter and no salt, it is not a problem for birds and animals to eat. You don't want to be giving them butter or salt, but plain popcorn is just fine. And then perhaps you'll see some woodland visitors visiting your property. So then you would just keep on going with whatever pattern you wanted until it was the length you wanted, and then you can string it up inside or outside. So that's a really simple and easy craft that you can do. Next, we're going to make a craft from the Victorian period called a pomander. And a pomander sounds really fancy, but it's actually really basic. All it is an orange and whole cloves. And not only is it really pretty to look at, but it smells really nice too, and it's going to make your house smell like Christmas. Now, all you need to do for this is grab your orange, and then if you want to do a fancy pattern like a star shape or rows of lines, you might also want a marker, and you might want to mark little dots all over the orange where you plan to put that pattern. In fact, if you're doing this craft with kids, it's a great idea to let them mark the pattern, because once you know your pattern, what you're going to do is you're going to take something sharp. And I like to use my big old needle for this again, but you could use the X-Acto knife or the tip of a paring knife. And you're gonna poke some holes in the oranges where you plan to put the cloves in, and that's just gonna make it easier to poke the cloves in. If you don't do this, it takes quite a bit of effort to get the cloves in, and you might make your finger a little bit sore. Once you have poked your holes, all you need to do is take your clove and poke it in where you put the hole. Now, if you really wanted to, I can't remember where my holes are now. If you really wanted to make your house smell even better, you could actually take a pomander like this once you have made it, and you can put it in a pot of water and put that pot of water to boil on the stove, and you are going to get a lovely scented house and kitchen. Or if you were making apple cider or maybe wassail, you could actually put a fresh pomander into your apple cider batch while the cider warmed up, and it's going to give your cider a lovely flavor of citrus and clove. Of course, you're going to want to strain it out before you drink it. Now, oranges were actually a very popular Christmas treat for many years, and that's because they grew in only warm places, which meant by the time they got to Canada, they had had quite the long journey, making them hard to find and expensive. So if you had an orange, you might have it as your once-a-year Christmas treat. Now, because they had to travel so far, it meant that sometimes the oranges were not in great condition by the time they got here. They could be rotten, or they couldn't be fit for eating, but you didn't want to throw it away or waste it, so instead you could use cloves and make a pomander, so you would still get some use out of the orange, even if you couldn't eat it. So there you go, 2 really easy holiday crafts that you can do at your house. You can do a cranberry and popcorn garland from the 1830s, or a clove-studded orange pomander from the Victorian or Edwardian era.
Another fascinating Christmas tradition or seasonal tradition to explore this time of year is one that, at least for me, is near and dear to my heart. I've always been fascinated with them, and that are the Nutcrackers. And of course, we know the songs about Nutcrackers and the theatrical plays and the like, but the Nutcracker has a very ancient origin, and one perhaps that we lose in sight of, this popular figurine of what they represent. Really, the Nutcracker goes back to medieval Germanic origins or even Druidic origins, and they represent, in basic terms, power over nature. Part of the traditional winter solstice festivals in pagan or Druidic times were the devouring of nature, the devouring of nature's bounty, if you will, and eating of nuts and fruits were part of the traditional winter solstice festivals, and that's how they also get nuts and fruits baked into edible things at this time of year, become really part of those traditions that have passed down and morphed over time. But Nutcracker still has the devouring part, and that is the nut, the mouth that opens up to crack the nut, to have power over the breaking of a natural element, if you will. The Nutcracker also represents power and strength. He is a fierce defender of the home, a good luck charm, if you will, to ward off evil spirits. He's a fierce protector, hence the barred teeth, if you will, and something that is said to resiliently defend the home during the darkest night of the year. Of course, that being the longest night being the Winter Solstice Festival, or the Winter Solstice time, so December 21st or 22nd. But traditionally, the Winter Solstice was combined with December 25th, and of course, we know those dates connecting to the Christmas festival in the modern era. But again, so Nutcrackers were seen as a good luck charm, warding off evil spirits and protecting and blessing a home, but also a power over nature, a fierce protector, a devourer of nature, and something that traditionally protects the home. And so we might have lost touch with some of its pagan or Druidic origins, given that they've been part of our culture for countless generations. But a good luck charm, perhaps not a bad thing at all. We can all use a little good luck charm at any time of year. So Nutcracker is one of my favorite connections to this time of year. Another tradition to share revolves around something that we probably take for granted a little bit, and as part of the festival season or the holiday season, and that is the Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree in our house and on the floor, standing tall and decorated with lights and topped with a star or another symbol of the season. Again, it's something perhaps we do without thinking of its history and how it came to be. But the first suggestion around a decorated Christmas tree is attributed to in Germany by Martin Luther in the 16th century, where out on a walk at night saw a fir tree adorned with stars, and was so inspired by the vision that he saw that he brought this tree indoors with him, and to recreate the symbol of the peace of the season, adorned the tree with candles. The idea of connecting to a tree as a symbol of the season is much older than even that. Whether it would be the undying oak or the evergreen tree, a tree that does not die and does not lose its leaves in the winter, they became revered symbols of nature. And so these things kind of percolate over time and develop the traditions of celebrating the season through the connections to a tree. It really, however, was in the Victorian era where the idea of decorating a Christmas tree became a popular family tradition, and it just circulated around Queen Victoria and the royal family. And we often know when things are celebrated or observed by the royal family, they catch on to society around them and begin to expand into kind of normalcy and become traditions of their own. Of course, Queen Victoria, ruling the British Empire beginning in 1837, at her height, controls the largest empire the world has ever seen. And these ideas around what the royal family are doing kind of explode and expand in the bounds of the British Empire, and therefore kind of wrap themselves around the globe over time. There was a royal depiction that was made of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert together with their children of decorating a Christmas tree. And this tree is depicted as being off the floor on the parlor table, and there's a reason for that. In antiquity, the tree was not to touch the ground. It would lose its magical embodiments, if you will. And so very early on, Christmas trees are depicted as being on a table and off the floor, and that is a Victorian era tradition. But the picture that appeared in print showed the royal family doing something that was kind of an everyday family activity, and it caught on like wildfire around the British Empire. In fact, it made its way even to the United States. The President Franklin Pierce was the first president to bring a Christmas tree into the White House in Washington, and he did that in 1853. And so, 1850s might not seem like a long time ago, but it is starting to bring forward these Christmas tree traditions, things that we perhaps take for granted today, but were very new at one point in time in terms of being embraced by a wider society. And so, decorating the Christmas tree in turn, early on, the decorations were done with symbols of nature, whether it be fruits, nuts, pine cones, baked goods, small homemade gifts, hand-dripped candles at one time, the ornaments known as kugels, glass-blown ornaments, and eventually this would get into the market of Christmas ornamentation, and something that has exploded exponentially since the decorations around Christmas time. But in the 1870s, store-bought ornaments became available for Christmas trees, and so they became very, very popular in terms of the symbols of Christmas, if you will, and they really gained popularity again through the Victorian era. They kind of build year to year, and really a lot of the traditions we observed, although many predate the Victorian era, many of them were shaped by how they were used in that era of time. And so they really became part of our traditions. Again, we're not dealing with necessarily ancient history per se in terms of how the Christmas trees evolved over time and how it moved from the parlor table onto the floor, as many of us observe today, and that really took place in and around 1900 to 1920 as a tradition, moving from the parlor table to the floor. But again, it is part of our cultural traditions today. We've inherited these things, and we've evolved them and morphed them into our own traditions. They become very intrinsic to our enjoyment of Christmas at this time of year. So thank you.